I want to thank Stephanie for inviting me to participate in the celebration of Paul's life. Paul and I met many years ago when we were in the service. But I was shocked when I was perusing the New York Times, as I do every morning, at the obituaries, when I saw 3/4 of a page devoted to a man that I knew many years ago. It was a wonderful tribute, and of course, it brought back many memories. Paul and I met in 1943 when we were thrown together at Camp Cook, California, after the Army decided that those of us that were in the ASTP program, Army Specialized Training Program, and all over the country, that they needed some fighting forces. We were thrown together and formed the 11th Armored Division, which became the point for George Patton's Army as the point for the 3rd Army. Our training period with Paul was very limited. We found out basic things, but to say that we had much medical training as compared to what the boys do today would be a gross exaggeration. Paul and I had one thing in common. Paul was going to be drafted, so he joined up, even though he was a conscientious objector. He decided he would be a medic because he was not able to kill. I also decided, when I got through with basic training and was sent to Camp Cook, that I did not want to kill either. So I asked to become a combat medic, which they allowed me to do. Paul was a man who was a free spirit, who also had a good appreciation for the people around him. He gravitated to the group that came back from ASTP, although he treated everyone equally. He found conversation easy with us. He made sure that when my buddies went on leave for weekends, that I was able to go with them, and granted me a pass. We were together during this time overseas, and after our short stint in England, we were shipped out Christmas Eve to Le Havre, France, where we were gathered to start combat on Christmas Day to help liberate the 101st Airborne Battalion that was trapped in Liège, Belgium. We were assigned to open up the St. Vith Highway to take us there and to allow troops and ammunition to get to the point. We were successful. We liberated Liège in about 4 days. After Liège, we were separated all over Germany. We were not a very cohesive unit, but those of us that were assigned as medics to a particular platoon stayed with them. I was fortunate enough to be the only original aid man left at the end of the war when we hit Mauthausen that started off in the war. Paul and I were young men when we first joined the Army. Here is Paul as I met him. Paul, handsome, warm, passionate, and understanding. Here I am at the same time, a young kid away from school, thrown in with a bunch of men much older than ourselves. Paul was in charge of the medical aid station. When we were stateside, he took care of the complaints, wounds, illnesses of the troops. And I guess that this gave him a good understanding of the people that he was surrounded with. After the commitment to the war, as I said, he was at the field hospital. We were out in the front. We were both wounded. We both received the Purple Heart. We did not really talk after the war about our experiences even to each other. We went on doing our work because what we encountered was incomprehensible to us at first. When the war ended, we were marching toward a very infamous camp. The name of the camp was Camp Mauthausen. What we encountered were naked men and women walking around. These are human beings, but they were naked, walking skeletons. We saw piles of dead bodies piled up like cordwood. We saw common graves where the Germans and guards tried to dispose of these bodies before we arrived. We saw bodies tangled up as if it was a mound of trash. This had a profound effect upon all of us, but what we were not aware of was that Paul was taking photographs of all of these atrocities. Paul developed and printed the photographs that I've just shown you, and we posted them in our aid station that we had set up in the town of Mauthausen. We had taken over a home that was upstairs an apartment, and downstairs was a store. And the store had large glass windows. We posted these photos on the windows for the townspeople to see. They did not believe it could have happened in their town. We got so angry that we gathered our lieutenant and captain and started to bring the townspeople up to see the site of the camp. And of course they all feigned surprise. We did not believe their surprise. It got to a point where we, quote, hired, unquote, some of the townspeople to come up and help us bury the corpses in a decent, humane way. I guess we were slightly successful. The one thing that the photos could not show was the sense of smell. The smell permeated the town of burning flesh, dead bodies, and it was so strong it permeated our clothing. Paul and I were not prepared for what we encountered. We had no information telling us that we would be coming to concentration camps that had these sort of atrocities. We were young kids that came into this horror camp. We left the service and went on our ways. Paul went to college, got married, had children. I heard from him for many years. I went to college and I went to law school and became an attorney. For a period of time, we had lost contact with each other. And one day, reading Time magazine, I saw a picture of a pot filling a full page and attributed to Paul Soldner. Now that's not a very common name, so I called Time, and after reluctance, they gave me his current address. I started to correspond with Paul again. In the meantime, or subsequently, Paul was summoned to New York to become a member of the Board of Trustees on the Museum of Modern Arts and Crafts in New York City. A woman that I know was on the board by the name of Helene Rosenberg and informed me that a Paul Soldner was coming in to be sworn in as a member. I informed her that I knew of Paul Soldner and who he was, so we made arrangements for us to meet. We had dinner together, had a very long, wonderful conversation, and exchanged tidbits of our life. We continued exchanging Christmas cards and notes on our Christmas cards. I had heard from Paul, and he sent me a DVD on Paul Soldner playing with fire, which is absolutely extraordinary. I also received a letter about 2 years ago thanking me for the Christmas cards and to keep sending them because he had lost touch with everyone else that was in our outfit. I think I would like to also thank the New York Times because every morning I look at the obituaries, and on the morning of January 10th, 2011 rather, I opened the obit page to B8 and I see a very handsome shot and a very beautiful vase thrown by Paul in the obituary, which took up almost a full page in the Times. Of course, I had to write Stephanie to tell her about what I knew of her dad. Her dad to me was a man who is not to be forgotten, who was a gentleman all the time that I knew him, and a free spirit that I really looked up to. Thank you again for listening. Thank you for this opportunity of sharing my views of Paul. Thank you. I want to thank Stephanie for inviting me to participate in the celebration of Paul's life, and formed the 11th Armored Division, which became the point for George Patton's army as the point for the 3rd Army. Our training period with Paul was very limited. We found out basic things, but to say that we had much medical training as compared to what the boys do today would be a gross exaggeration. Paul and I had one thing in common. Paul was going to be drafted, so he joined up, even though he was a conscientious objector. He decided he would be a medic because he was not able to kill. I also decided. Paul and I met many years ago when we were in the service. But I was shocked when I was perusing the New York Times, as I do every morning, at the obituaries, when I saw 3/4 of a page devoted to a man that I knew many years ago. It was a wonderful tribute, and of course, it brought back many memories. Paul and I met in 1943 when we were thrown together at Camp Cook, California, after the Army decided that those of us that were in the ASTP program, Army Specialized Training Program, and all over the country, that they needed some fighting forces. We were thrown together